Alright, radio is almost done. Now I'll be able to communicate with the outside world.
Thank you.
Now I just have to update it and... Oh no. How does this improve my user experience? Final Fantasy has a long history of great characters and moments, so choosing what made it onto the list was incredibly tough. Already some of the responses to the last video have brought up characters I really wish I'd put on the list now. That's a big reason why I chose to bring in some new faces for this round. Even though I did my best to be comprehensive with my research, there are always going to be characters I didn't think of. But now you can hear some other people's opinions brought directly to you through the internet, through the magic of shark speakers. So with that out of the way, let's go, on with the list.
Number 5.
First off, a bit of backstory. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles is the game that got me into Final Fantasy. While technically Final Fantasy II was the first game I played in the series, I was way too young to really understand anything about it. It was because of Crystal Chronicles that I eventually gave the DS remake of Final Fantasy IV a shot, and moved on to love the series from there. So because of that, I'd really love to see this spin-off represented in Dissidia in some way. The problem is, there's not that much to draw on for gameplay or story from the original games. No, we have to go deeper. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, The Crystal Bears, was a spin-off of the spin-off that gave the series a more realistic look and an actual main character, Lael. He's a fun, adventurous guy, which Dissidia could use more of, and he brings a unique power to the roster, telekinesis. He uses it in all sorts of ways in the game, picking up enemies and objects, grappling or throwing things. He can even use it on himself in a few ways. Applying this to Dissidia is a bit tricky though, but I think he could work as the game's very first grappler. Dissidia doesn't use grabs like most fighters do, but Lael's abilities could be all about that. Failing that, he could simply summon items that he uses in the game. Whatever they go with, Lael would definitely be a unique addition to the series.
I'm the escort. You called for me.
Number 4. High Heels.
Final Fantasy VII is by no means my personal favorite Final Fantasy game.
But it does have my favorite universe. I don't know if it's because they decided to make other games taking place in it, because really all good that did us was give us Crisis Core, and even then its quality could be heavily debated. But something about the dark, grim, edgy Shadow the Hedge Trimmer vibes that Midgar gives off just really gets to me. And what really embodies its gross, slummy grossness for me are the Turks. Despite being named after a country mostly known for mustaches and oil wrestling, they are also a type of back alley FBI that do all kinds of sketchy shit. From trafficking human beings to kidnapping, and from assassinations to comic relief. Quite the awful crowd indeed. So naturally, my pick goes out to General Beatrix from Final Fantasy IX. Not because I necessarily like her so much as a character, though I do think her design is pretty cool, but mostly because I think she's just a very good pick for a fighting game. I mean, arguably, the sword magic thingies from Final Fantasy IX are amongst the coolest in the series. Spells like Clim Hazard, Thunder Slash, and Shock always seemed really awesome to me, and I'd also just say that she would fit very well overall as a rather nimble yet hard-hitting sword fighter. She could jump and run around and keep up with characters like Lightning and Zidane, but she could also completely wreck your shit like Squall or Cloud with the before-mentioned sword arts. Overall, I'd say she just fit in perfectly in a fighting game, especially one that works like Dissidia does. And Final Fantasy IX just doesn't get enough love in my opinion. So I'd say that giving it just that is long overdue.
Number 4.
Back in part 1, I mentioned that Final Fantasy XIII would be getting a lot of new characters. And I also mentioned that it'd be very hard to choose which characters would make the cut. While Caius was a pretty obvious choice for a villain, picking a hero is a bit more difficult. I was seriously considering Noel. He's the protagonist of Final Fantasy XIII too. He has a unique fighting style and connections to Caius, so he'd work on that level. I was also really leaning towards Vanille. I think there could be a cool parallel where she's on the villain side but mingles with the heroes, reflecting her role in the original game. But ultimately, there was one character that fit way better than everybody else. Sarah, Lightning's sister, and the heroine of 13-2. Originally just a damsel in distress, a goal for the party of the first game. Sarah joins the fight come 13-2, where she takes the center role. Like Noel, she also fights against Caius, the antagonist of 13-2, but their connection is a bit different. Sarah is cursed with the same power as Yule, Caius' most important companion. Within the world of Dissidia, this connection would probably take a different turn, but it could still be very interesting to see. In a fight, Sarah's very versatile. She's a great natural spellcaster, but she also has a transforming weapon which can turn into a sword, bow, or moogle as needed. Another interesting thing is that she starts off with the Sentinel role, something that Lightning doesn't have, and is more associated with her maybe someday husband Snow. It's a purely defensive class, and could help subvert the usual squishiness of mages that Sarah definitely falls into. As a side thing, the Moogle Toss exploration ability should be incorporated as some sort of joke ability.
Number VZ.
When I look at the cast of characters already present in the Dissidia games, I see a lot of the main characters, with a few of the supporting cast being introduced in the second game. If that number is going to grow at all in the next installment, which, I mean, we know it will, I think that it's high time Oren from Final Fantasy X was added to the roster. A lot of the main characters present in the series so far are played off as the tall, dark, and handsome strangers with a past, and I think it's high time we bring in the tallest, darkest, handsomest, strangerest, most past-havinest, huge sword-wielding dude out there. Oren has always been my favorite character from Final Fantasy X, due in large part to his role as the enigmatic old man who really knows what's going on. His experience and demeanor as a character would help him fit right in with the dire tone that all of the characters seem to exist in for the cutscenes. And when talking battle, there's no way Oren wouldn't fit right in. Being a student of the Final Fantasy Magnate Academy for the furthering of having giant swords, Oren would have no shortage of awesome moves to add to the game's arsenal. I think I see him playing more like a tank-style character, reducing his attack maneuverability in favor of landing larger hits. His bravery attacks could be downplayed slightly, making for shorter combos requiring more of them, but once it's time to bring the damage shall be brought. Oren has a series of great-looking and very effective overdrive attacks from his home game that I think would translate well to the kind of spectacle the Dissidia series brings to the table.
This is my story, and you're not part of it.
Number 3.
I think if there's anyone making it into Dissidia to represent Final Fantasy V, it'll be Galuf. It was already kinda hinted at in the previous game, but screw it, I want Ferris. Part of one of gaming's oldest and most beloved traditions, Ferris is a woman who pretends to be a man. A pirate man, in this case. Final Fantasy V suffers from the same problem as Final Fantasies 2 and 3, in that gameplay-wise, there's nothing that really differentiates any of the hero characters. There's very little that separates Ferris from Bartz or any of the other playable characters. But I think there's something that we can draw on here, and it's thanks in part to the fact that Ferris is a pirate. The Game Boy Advance version of Final Fantasy V added 4 new jobs: the Gladiator, Cannoneer, Oracle, and Necromancer. I especially think the Cannoneer job lends itself to this situation, as it's as piratey as it sounds, and while that's the only one with a direct connection, you can kind of stretch it to make it work for the other ones too. You could use the Gladiator's abilities like the Elemental attack to represent piratey, swashbuckling, swordplay, that kind of thing. And then the Necromancer and all of its darkness-based magic attacks kind of fit in with the skull motif of a classical pirate. The Oracle thing really has no connection to anything, it's based around predicting attacks that happen later on. But they could kind of make it work by giving her a spyglass to use for those attacks or something like that, that'd be kind of cute. All of these jobs are really underrepresented in all Final Fantasy games, and it gives a really diverse mix of abilities that can make Ferris a pretty fun character. One who fights like a woman, who dresses like a man.
Number Strax.
A great character I'd like to see enter the world of Dissidia is Bosch von Ronsenberg from Final Fantasy XII. After seeing that Ramza was included, I was overjoyed. The world of Ivalice holds a lot of history and details, so to see it represented is great. Bosch seems worthy of representing Final Fantasy XII alongside Vaan and could work upon similar mechanics, albeit a much heavier hitter. From swords, axes, and hammers alongside defensive counters, slower based combat could take place. This makes a change from a lot of the speedier characters within Cosmos' lineup. It'd be worth seeing if his bravery meter could even be used as a defensive buff, drawing parallels to his high vitality within the base game and the defensive spells within the sequel, Revenant Wings. I didn't really like that one though. There's many characters I could choose from, but it seems befitting for Bosch to take the role as one of the true heroes of his own story. Sorry, Vaan. Nice abs though.
Number 2.
Final Fantasy VII is such an important part of the franchise that it technically got 4 reps in Dissidia, with Cloud, Sephiroth, Tifa, and the bonus DLC assist character Aerith. I think the reps are going to keep flowing in from there on, but who will make the cut? Will they pull from the main game and have Barrett, or someone like that? Will they draw on Dirge of Cerberus, the sequel that I guess just doesn't happen if you don't recruit Vincent and Yuffie? I think everyone knows this is leading to Crisis Core. Zack should be in Dissidia. But he'll just be a clone of Cloud, shout the wrong people. Despite using the same sword as his legacy, Zack has a fighting style of his own, or rather, several others. A key element of the gameplay of Crisis Core is the digital mind wave, a slot machine where you proverbially pull the lever to level up Zack and his items. But more specifically, it can also unleash special moves, this game's version of limit breaks, based on people that he meets who are important to him in some way. I could see this going one of 2 ways. Either give Zack special moves based on the ones that he uses in the DMV in the game, or it could go a bit differently. Bartz from Final Fantasy V represented the Mime class. This manifested in him copying all of his allies' abilities and combining them in different ways. I think Zack could totally work as a villain version of that. And yes, Zack should be a villain. He worked for Shinra after all. Zack also has a bunch of materia abilities, which means he can use magic on some level too. Cloud always used fire magic in Dissidia, and Tifa used ice, so I think Zack should complete the trio and use thunder magic. Really, the only problem with including Zack is you know what's probably going to happen at the end, and you know you're probably going to cry.
Number Riata.
You know, when I thought about the characters that should be appearing in the Dissidia game, I was thinking about my own fan favourite characters that I personally prefer, Balthea, Setzer, or Zack. But in actuality, I should be thinking about what character would fit the gameplay of Dissidia really good, and I came to the conclusion that Dissidia doesn't have a trickster character, a hero who can dart around the battlefield and play slightly differently, perhaps laying traps, throwing bombs and such, and therefore I was led to Riku. More specifically, the Final Fantasy X-2 incarnation of Riku, where she looks kinda awesome, and not to mention the fact that as someone who makes use of the use command in battle to throw grenades and steal and use items as needed, this is someone who, in combination with her twin daggers that she has in X-2, could dart around the battlefield similar to the speed of Zidane and actually lay traps and play not quite defensively, but in a nice mix-up that makes it hard to keep the opposing player on their feet because they don't know what kind of attack you're going to use or what traps you've laid. It makes for potentially a very thoroughly engrossing, slightly anti-action feel that can actually fit the Dissidia series very well, and I'm surprised that more characters of this type haven't actually been added already. It's something that I hope they really do, and therefore I want Riku in the new Dissidia.
Number 1.
Vivi. Everyone loves Vivi. If you don't love Vivi, you're probably wrong. This lovable little guy with his existential crisis and coming to terms with his own mortality is one of the highlights of Final Fantasy IX for me. Easily one of the best stories about race, self-worth, and coming to terms with the inevitability of your own death to ever star a 9-year-old. Vivi is just such an endearing little guy. He's naive and childlike, and is afraid of many things, but he's brave enough to push on anyways. As his design might have given away by now, Vivi is closely related to the classic Black Mage class, and that means magic and only magic. While Dissidia has many magic-focused characters, most notably Terra, who fits the Black Mage role to a T, I think Vivi translates to gameplay really well and can still be unique. He could be a heavy hitter mage, based more around big explosions and outbursts of power as opposed to more elegant things like Terra's abilities. Vivi's trademark ability is Focus, which you can use repeatedly to power up his spells. This can easily translate into a mechanic where you hold down the button to do slower, more powerful attacks, or tap it lightly to use faster, weaker attacks. Maybe they could have a cute little thing where if you charge too long it backfires and it startles him a little bit. His special trance ability works in seamlessly as well. Double black magic could simply make his attacks longer, have a few extra hits, or otherwise include extra capabilities. They could even have it so he uses 2 different types of magic at the same time. That could be cool. And then when he wants to bring an end to things, you can bring out his signature move, Doomsday. Seriously, there's no reason not to include this little badass. That concludes my Dissidia Most Wanted list. As usual, you can leave a Cosmos or a Chaos comment below. If you liked this video, you should check out videos from each of my guests. If you liked Thor High Heels, check out his review of Metal Gear Solid Ghost Babel. Or you can check out VZ's Illusion of Gaia video. Or if not that, then how about Strex's Maximo video? Or if you're looking for something more Final Fantasy, check out Rietta's in-depth look at the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy. Thanks so much to each of you. I'm so glad to have you all on. If you, the viewer, wants to keep up with these sorts of things, and maybe see some very blatant clues of what's to come next, you can follow me on Twitter at HatDogTalk. And with that, see you next time.